It was early November, late at night, when I pulled off the highway near the outskirts of a small town in northern Tennessee. My car was low on fuel, the warning light blinking stubbornly at me, and the long hours of driving had left my neck stiff and my eyes heavy. The sky was overcast, clouds low and thick, obscuring the moon and turning the world outside into a dark, gray blur. I followed the faint glow of a single gas station sign from the distance, flickering intermittently as if unsure whether to stay on or off. The station was set back from the road, off a short gravel drive that crunched under my tires as I slowed down. There were no brand logos, no prices posted for the pumps. Just a boxy, yellowed structure with a single set of dim, buzzing fluorescent lights above the entrance. I parked next to the only working pump and cut the engine. The wind picked up immediately, cold and sharp, rattling the side mirrors and sending small debris skittering across the gravel lot. The smell of wet leaves and gasoline mixed in the air, heavy and biting. I grabbed my wallet and stepped out, the soles of my shoes crunching on the loose gravel. The station itself looked abandoned from the outside, windows grimy and streaked, the door's glass clouded with fingerprints or condensation. I couldn't tell which. Inside, the lights flickered in a slow, uneven rhythm. The faint hum of the fluorescent tubes was almost hypnotic, a constant background drone that seemed louder in the otherwise still night. The interior smelled like burnt coffee, old fryer grease, and the faint, acrid tang of cleaning chemicals that hadn't been replaced in years. The floor tiles were cracked, scuffed, and sticky in places, and the shelves sagged under the weight of dusty snack bags and outdated cans of soda. I moved toward the counter, hoping to find someone who could take my payment. There was a lone cashier behind the register, a man in his 50s with a thin, gray beard and tired eyes that seemed to be staring through me rather than at me. He didn't smile. He didn't speak. I fumbled with my card, the swipe taking longer than usual, and the card reader emitted a shrill, unsteady beep as if protesting. Once the transaction cleared, I filled the tank. The sound of the fuel sloshing into the car was unnervingly loud in the quiet night. Outside, the wind carried with it a low, constant whistle, sharp and deliberate, coming from the line of trees that bordered the lot. It wasn't the whistle of the wind through the branches, or any bird I recognized. It was measured, slow, and repeated every few seconds, cutting through the night with an almost human precision. I glanced toward the tree line, but the darkness swallowed everything beyond the reach of the dim lot lights. My skin crawled, the hairs on my arms standing on end. I tried to tell myself it was just the wind, or maybe some machinery in the distance, but the pattern was too deliberate. My pulse quickened. I finished pumping and stepped back, noticing a figure standing by the edge of the trees, just beyond the reach of the lights. At first, I thought it was another customer, but the person, or something resembling a person, didn't move, didn't react. I squinted, and it felt as though it was watching me, though I couldn't make out any features. I tugged at the car door, telling myself I was overreacting. When I looked back a few seconds later, the figure was gone. My stomach twisted. The rational part of me tried to dismiss it. Maybe a shadow, a trick of the light, but the uneasy knot in my chest refused to loosen. I returned to the car, trying to calm my racing thoughts. As I sat inside, the wind picked up again, rattling the windows and scraping against the metal roof. I could hear the faint hum of the fluorescent lights through the walls of the station, like a distant, irregular heartbeat. Something about the stillness outside, the absolute lack of movement beyond the gravel lot, pressed down on me. The sense of being watched lingered, stubborn and persistent, clawing at the edges of my perception. I kept glancing toward the trees, every shadow seeming to stretch and shift unnaturally. The whistle returned, low and slow, making my chest tighten as if the air itself had become heavy and hostile. I tried to start the car, the engine turning over and coughing before finally settling into a steady growl. My hands gripped the steering wheel a little too tightly. I checked my mirrors, the rear window, the gravel lot. The man at the counter was still behind the glass, still staring, still unreadable. The sensation of dread made my palms sweat. The car interior suddenly too warm and too small. I wanted to leave, to put as much distance between me and that place as possible. But the gravel made the tires slip slightly when I tried to pull forward, and my nerves made every sound explode in my ears. Finally, I eased onto the road, headlights slicing through the darkness. The whistle ceased abruptly the moment I moved, leaving the night hollow and quiet again. The station shrank in my rearview mirror, dim and flickering, like a bad memory. The sense of being observed stayed with me long after I drove past the turnoff, a prickling awareness at the base of my skull that refused to fade. I kept glancing in the mirrors, half expecting to see something, anything, emerging from the shadows behind me. There was nothing, only the empty highway stretching ahead, wet and glimmering under the muted reflection of the clouds. By the time I reached the next town, my body felt tense, every muscle wound tight. The rational explanations came in waves. Maybe the man behind the counter had just been tired. Maybe the shadows had been tricks of the lights. Maybe the whistle had been a loose branch scraping against metal. But deep down, I knew the place was wrong. There was a deliberate emptiness to it, a stillness that didn't belong in a station meant for people. I told myself I would never stop there again. Months later, I looked it up, trying to find it on a map, but nothing matched the location. The road had names and exits, but no gas station appeared in any satellite view or street-level image. It was as if it had never been there, yet I remembered every detail: the flickering lights, the smell of old grease, the cold whistle of the trees, and the man behind the counter staring through me. It stayed with me. Even now, when I drive long stretches alone at night, I recall the gravel crunching under my tires, the hum of the fluorescent lights, the deliberate whistle from the treeline. It was a place that existed at the edge of memory, entirely real in every sense that mattered, terrifying in the way only quiet, empty spaces can be. It was a warning I didn't understand at the time, a reminder of how small and vulnerable I am when I leave the safety of well-lit roads, and how easy it is to mistake normal for nothing at all. I never saw the figure again, never stopped at a station that looked anything like it, and yet I carry it with me, the memory vivid, detailed, and unrelenting. This happened during a road trip in summer 2019, somewhere in northern Arizona, but I couldn't tell you the highway if I tried. The map on my phone had lost signal hours earlier, and we were running on memory and guesswork after missing a turn once the sun dropped. There were 4 of us coming back from a camping trip, tired in the way that makes every thought slower. We had driven longer than planned, talked less as the night stretched on, and watched the fuel needle sink with each mile. When the low fuel light came on, it felt earlier than it should have, which added a tight edge to the quiet inside the car. The road was empty in a way that felt deliberate, like it had been left alone on purpose. No reflectors, no distant headlights. The desert on either side was black and wide, broken only by the pale ribbon of asphalt. Then the station appeared without warning. There was no exit sign, no mile marker, no billboard advertising cheap coffee or clean bathrooms. Just a low concrete building pushed back from the road, a flat roof, and one working pump under a buzzing light. The rest of the lot was gravel. The building looked old but not abandoned, like something that survived by staying unnoticed. My friend pulled in and parked beside the pump. The engine clicked as it cooled. The night air smelled dry and mineral, with a hint of gasoline carried by the wind. While he stepped out to fuel the car, I opened my door and stood up to stretch my legs. My back felt stiff from hours of sitting. The desert felt close there, pressing up against the thin ring of light from the station. Shadows crowded the edge of the gravel. I walked toward the side of the building, keeping within the glow but wanting a little space. That was when I heard movement in the brush. It was low and fast, not heavy, not loud. Something shifted through gravel and dry plants, close enough that I could tell it was circling the building rather than crossing straight through. The sound stayed just outside the light. It never stepped into view. There were no eyes reflecting back at me, no shape I could fix on. Just the sound of small stones sliding and scrub bending under weight. It moved with intent, keeping pace as I took a few slow steps, then stopped when I stopped. I stood still and listened. The sound resumed, closer now, then farther, as if testing distance. My skin tightened along my arms. I told myself it was an animal, maybe a coyote, maybe more than one. The desert was full of things that stayed hidden. Still, the way it moved felt measured. It wasn't random. It was aware of me. I felt watched without being seen, which was worse than seeing something outright. I went back toward the pump, keeping my eyes forward and my steps even. The sound followed along the edge, never crossing into the open. My friend was focused on the pump, the numbers ticking upward. The other two stayed in the car, windows up. I didn't point out the noise. I didn't want to say it out loud and make it real in a way I couldn't take back. I went inside the store. The door creaked as it opened, letting out a wave of stale air. The place was dim, lit by humming fluorescent tubes that flickered at the ends. The shelves held dusty snacks and sun-faded labels. A cooler buzzed in the corner. Behind the counter stood the clerk. He was thin, with a posture that suggested long hours on his feet. What caught my attention were his forearms. Thick scars ran across them, parallel and evenly spaced, pale against darker skin. They looked old and deliberate, not accidents. He didn't look at me. His eyes stayed fixed on the windows, scanning the lot and the dark beyond the glass. I moved through the store slowly, aware of my own breathing, the sound of my shoes on the floor. The clerk's focus never shifted. He watched the pump, the car, the road, then the shadows beyond the lights. His hands rested flat on the counter. The scars lined up perfectly when his arms tensed, like marks left by repeated contact with something rigid. I felt a pressure in my chest, the sense that this place was not meant for lingering. I grabbed a bottle of water and set it on the counter. The clerk rang it up without looking at me, his eyes still tracking movement outside. I glanced back toward the windows and saw nothing but darkness and the outline of our car. The sound in the brush had stopped, or maybe I just couldn't hear it through the glass. The stillness inside the store felt fragile, like it could break with the wrong movement. When I stepped back outside, the pump clicked off. My friend finished fueling and replaced the nozzle. The air felt heavier than before, thick with the smell of gas and dust. I moved toward the car, keeping my head up. The desert around us stayed quiet. No sound from the brush this time. We got back in and pulled out onto the road. The headlights swept across the asphalt and the shoulder ahead. That was when something crossed the road in front of us. It was tall, taller than it should have been, and hunched forward. It moved from one side to the other in a smooth, gliding way that didn't match the uneven ground. It didn't pause. It didn't react to the lights. Its motion looked wrong because it was too efficient, like the usual markers of walking had been erased. No visible bend at the knees. No sway. Just a forward slide that carried it out of view. The car slowed without anyone saying a word. My heart pounded hard enough to feel in my throat. The shape disappeared into the dark on the far side of the road. We didn't stop. The road stretched ahead, empty again, and we kept going until the station was far behind us and the darkness closed in. Miles later, once the tension eased enough for my thoughts to line up, I started to make sense of it. The scars on the clerk's arms came back to me first. They looked like the kind left by handling barbed wire day after day, the parallel lines matching the spacing of fence strands. In parts of northern Arizona, people run cattle and maintain miles of fencing in harsh conditions. The clerk watched the windows because he had reason to. That station felt like a known stop for people who didn't want attention. The movement in the brush made more sense when I thought about how close we were to remote border routes used for smuggling. People move through the desert at night, staying low, staying out of sight, working in groups with clear roles. Someone circles to watch. Someone waits for a signal. The sound I heard was likely a lookout keeping to the shadows, careful not to step into the light. The tall shape crossing the road stopped feeling unreal when I pictured a man carrying a loaded pack frame, the kind used to haul supplies across long distances. When someone leans forward under that kind of weight, their posture changes. The load can extend above the head, making the person appear much taller. In headlights, depth flattens and motion smooths out, especially when someone moves with practiced efficiency. The lack of visible joints came from the angle and the speed, not from anything impossible. We had stumbled onto a place that served a purpose we weren't meant to understand. The station existed because it was useful, not because it was safe or welcoming. The clerk watched the dark because trouble came from there as often as customers did. The desert hid people the same way it hid animals, and that night we were just passing through a system already in motion. By the time we reached a stretch of road with proper signs and steady traffic, the fear had settled into something colder and clearer. Nothing had tried to stop us. Nothing had chased us. We had seen only fragments of a larger operation that relied on silence and routine. The wrongness came from being briefly visible to it. When we finally stopped again hours later, at a bright station crowded with other travelers, the memory stayed sharp. It wasn't about something unknown. It was about seeing how close ordinary danger could get without ever stepping into the light. This was October 2019, and I was driving alone on a long stretch of rural highway in northern Pennsylvania, heading home after visiting a friend for the weekend. The sky had been darkening for hours, the clouds thick and low, and the occasional gust of wind rattled the car. I had been on the road for nearly 7 hours, and the small orange light on my dashboard flicked on, warning that I was running low on fuel. I had miscalculated the distance between towns, and the next city on my GPS was still 40 miles away. I decided to pull off at the next gas station, though the directions had taken me down a narrow, winding road that felt entirely out of the way. The gas station appeared suddenly, like a rectangle of light in the middle of shadowed woods. There was no signage beyond a flickering open sign above the door. No prices were posted outside, and the pumps themselves were old, yellowed with age, with peeling stickers indicating brands I didn't recognize. The lot was gravel, uneven, with scattered oil stains that reflected the dim light of the lone street lamp. The smell hit me before I even got out of the car. A mixture of burnt oil, gasoline, and the faint tang of something metallic that I couldn't place. It wasn't unpleasant exactly, just sharp and sour, and it made my stomach tighten slightly. I parked, keeping the car close to the building, and stepped out into the cold night. My shoes crunched on the gravel. The wind was stronger here, cutting through my jacket and rattling the corner of the roof over the entrance. There were no other cars, no signs of movement beyond the gas pumps. I walked around the front of the truck to the first pump and started filling the tank. The sound of gasoline rushing into the tank was steady, almost loud in the emptiness. Behind the station, the trees pressed close, skeletal against the dark sky. I caught movement at the edge of the lot, a shadow flitting between trunks, and I froze, thinking maybe it was a stray animal. Whatever it was, it didn't move closer, and eventually, I told myself it was just a trick of the dim light. The building itself was small, a single rectangular space with a large front window that reflected my car back at me. Inside, a fluorescent light buzzed, flickering at intervals that made the shadows on the walls twitch. The shelves were half empty, lined with outdated snacks, cracked candy wrappers, and faded sodas. The air smelled heavier inside, more like grease and burnt coffee than fuel. I walked past the counter, glancing at the register, and noticed a ledger behind it, dusty, with yellowed pages. My eyes caught a small calendar taped to the wall. It was from the previous year, September 2018. I realized the place probably hadn't seen much business in a long time. While my tank filled, I noticed the pumps were slow. The nozzle felt sticky in my hand, and I had to hold it in place for longer than usual. The gas meter ticked steadily but seemed to hesitate at certain intervals, almost as if the pump itself was struggling. I looked out at the lot again. The shadow between the trees was back, moving slowly along the edge of the forest, closer now to the far pump, though still far enough that I couldn't see clearly what it was. My heart started to beat a little faster. I told myself it was probably a deer, maybe a raccoon, something that belonged in the woods. The wind picked up again, whistling through gaps in the roof overhang and making the old metal sign above the door clatter. The sound was sharp, rhythmic, and I realized with a chill that it almost sounded deliberate. I shook my head, focusing on the gas. Then I noticed another detail I hadn't before. The ground beneath the pump had deep scratches etched into it, jagged and uneven, as if something heavy had dragged itself across the gravel. I bent down, brushing away loose dirt and stones, revealing long grooves that ended abruptly near the edge of the pavement. I frowned. There was no car or vehicle that could have made those marks. They were too deep and irregular. I finished filling the tank and replaced the nozzle, the hiss of the pump ending abruptly. The air felt colder, heavier somehow. The shadow in the trees hadn't moved, but now I could make out a figure crouched, hunched low, watching. It was thin, ragged in shape, but still distinctly human. I backed toward the car slowly, keeping my eyes on it. The figure didn't approach, didn't make a sound, just remained there. A still silhouette in the dark. I unlocked the doors and climbed inside, locking it immediately. My hands shook as I inserted the key. The engine roared to life, and the headlights caught the figure just enough to reveal its posture. Hunched, almost as if it were guarding something or waiting. I decided not to linger. I pulled out of the lot carefully, keeping my lights on full beam and glancing in the rearview mirror. The figure didn't follow. It didn't move as I drove past the pumps, past the building, and back onto the road. The street lamp above the lot flickered once, then died, leaving the station a rectangle of shadow again. The rest of the drive was tense. Every rustle of trees, every flicker of light on the roadside made me flinch. I thought about calling the police, but there was no real crime. Nothing I could report beyond a strange figure at a deserted gas station in the middle of the night. When I finally reached the next town, the lights and signs felt surreal, almost comforting. I stopped at a convenience store to shake off the tension. The people inside were ordinary, the air warm and filled with the smell of baked goods, and for the first time since that night, I exhaled fully. I never went back to that stretch of highway. Weeks later, I looked it up online, trying to see if anyone else had mentioned the station. There was nothing. No reviews, no reports, no record beyond a single vague address tucked away in GPS coordinates. The memory stayed with me for months. The image of that hunched figure at the edge of the trees, the smell of old grease and gasoline, the stillness of the lot. It wasn't supernatural. It wasn't unreal. It was just a person, somewhere in those woods, watching, waiting, and it was enough to remind me that some places exist in a state of suspended reality, ordinary yet wholly unsettling. The experience left me with a sense of cautious respect for empty roads and unmarked stations, and I learned that sometimes the most terrifying things are simply people in the wrong place at the wrong time. That station never appeared on any map again. I told myself it was a fluke, an abandoned place that had survived the years without notice, but every time I drive that highway in the dark, I can't help scanning the tree lines, wondering if someone or something is still out there. I stopped for energy drinks before a night shift, the kind of stop I had made hundreds of times without thinking about it. I worked overnight security at an industrial site outside town, 12-hour shifts that blurred together, powered by caffeine and routine. That night felt no different when I pulled off the road just after 9 p.m. Sky already black, traffic thinning out. The gas station sat on a corner where the streetlights faded, bright enough to see but far enough from everything else to feel separate. The lot was half full, mostly trucks and one older sedan parked crooked near the side. The lights buzzed overhead, casting a pale glow that made everything look flatter than it should have. I went inside with my hood up, already tired, already thinking about the hours ahead. The clerk greeted me right away. He leaned forward on the counter, smiling, watching me longer than necessary. I grabbed 2 energy drinks from the cooler, the cold biting into my fingers. As I walked back toward the register, he kept talking. He commented on the weather, then asked if I was working late. His voice was casual, but his eyes stayed locked on my face, tracking every small reaction. He asked where I worked, then where I lived, then what time I usually got off. The questions stacked up fast, one after another without pause. It felt less like conversation and more like data collection. I gave vague answers without stopping, keeping my tone light but nonspecific. I paid attention to the way his expression shifted when my responses stayed loose. The smile thinned, his posture straightened, his voice lost warmth. The words kept coming, but the tone changed to something flatter, more measured. He looked me over in pieces, not as a customer, but as something to be evaluated. I noticed his hands resting on the counter, fingers still, no nervous movement. That calm didn't match the friendliness from seconds earlier. I paid and took my drinks, the receipt printing loud in the quiet store. As I turned to leave, I felt his eyes on my back, not drifting away, not distracted, fixed. Outside, the night air felt heavier than before. I walked toward my car and noticed the white van parked along the far edge of the lot, partially hidden by the dumpster enclosure. I hadn't seen it when I pulled in. It was plain, older, with no markings. As I passed, I caught details without trying. No plates on the back. The front plate area empty too. The hood radiated faint heat, the metal warm when I brushed past it by accident. That meant it had been running recently or was still running. I got into my car and locked the doors. I started the engine and pulled out slowly, watching the mirrors. The van stayed put until I reached the street. Then it eased out behind me, headlights off at first, rolling forward on momentum before the lights clicked on. I told myself not to jump to conclusions. Lots of people leave gas stations at the same time. Still, my shoulders tightened. I kept my speed steady, didn't make sudden turns. The van stayed behind me through the first intersection, then the next. The distance between us didn't change. Close enough to see the shape of the driver through the windshield, but not close enough to seem aggressive. I took a longer route than usual, looping through an area with more lights and open businesses. The van followed. My pulse picked up, each beat sharp and clear. I planned my next move carefully, thinking through options instead of panic. After about a mile, the van slowed and turned off onto a side road, disappearing into darkness without signaling. I didn't slow down. I didn't look back again. I arrived at work unsettled but intact. The shift passed without incident, though I kept replaying the stop in my head. The clerk's questions, the shift in tone, the van's timing. None of it was enough on its own, but together it formed a shape I didn't like. The next night, I drove the same route out of habit. As I neared the intersection, flashing lights lit the road ahead. Red and blue reflected off trees and storefronts. Traffic was slowed and redirected. When I got close enough to see, my stomach dropped. The gas station was taped off. Yellow tape stretched across the entrance and around the building. Several police cars filled the lot, doors open, officers moving between them with purpose. The lights were off inside the store. The windows looked dark and hollow. An evidence van sat near the pumps, its rear doors open. I pulled over farther down the road and sat there longer than I should have, watching. I didn't need details to understand that something had gone wrong there. The scale of the response said enough. Later, after my shift, I looked it up. The information was sparse at first, then clearer as reports updated. The clerk had been arrested along with another man connected to the van. The station had been used as a contact point, a place to identify and track people who fit certain patterns. Night workers, isolated routines, predictable schedules. The questions weren't curiosity. They were filters. The van had been tied to multiple incidents across county lines. People followed after routine stops. Some escaped, some didn't. The lack of plates wasn't oversight. It was deliberate. The station's cameras had been adjusted to favor the counter and the entrance, not the lot. The clerk controlled who was seen and who wasn't. I realized how close I had come to giving away too much without meaning to. A clear answer about my job, a specific location, a set time. All of it would have narrowed me down from passerby to target. My hesitation had marked me as uncertain, harder to predict. The tone change wasn't irritation. It was reassessment. The van following me wasn't coincidence. It was confirmation. They wanted to see if I went straight home, if I noticed, if I changed my behavior. When I did, when I took longer routes and stayed in lit areas, the plan shifted. They let me go. The station being shut down the next night didn't feel like relief. Felt like delayed understanding. The danger hadn't been sudden or dramatic. It had been quiet and patient, hiding behind friendly questions and bright lights. It relied on routine and trust. It waited for people too tired to question why someone cared so much about their life. I still stop for energy drinks before night shifts. I just don't stop there anymore. And I don't answer questions that don't have a reason behind them. That night taught me how thin the line is between normal and wrong, and how easily it disappears when someone knows exactly what to ask. I stopped because I was lost. Not the casual kind of lost where you miss a turn and fix it a mile later, but the deeper kind where the map on your phone turns into a gray grid and the blue dot stops moving. I had been driving back roads longer than planned, trying to shave time off a late-night trip by trusting GPS too much. When it stopped loading, the darkness felt heavier. No houses, no traffic, just fields and tree lines dissolving into black. The gas station was the only light for miles. I saw it before I saw the road bend toward it, a pale square floating in the distance. The canopy lights were on, steady but dim, and the building sat back from the road like it didn't want attention. I pulled in mostly for direction, not fuel. My tank was fine, but my nerves were not. The lot was empty, no cars, no tire noise cooling in the air, just my engine and the hum of lights. I shut the car off and sat for a moment, listening. The quiet felt managed, like sound had been trimmed down instead of absent. I stepped out and the smell of old gasoline and dust clung to the air. The night felt dry, cool enough to raise goosebumps on my arms. The door chimed when I walked in, a sharp, bright sound that echoed longer than it should have. The inside lights were on, brighter than the lot, washing everything in flat white. The first thing I noticed was the register drawer. It was already open. Bills lay inside, neat but exposed. Coins sat in their slots. No hand hovered nearby. No movement behind the counter. I stood still, waiting for someone to step out from the back or clear their throat. Nothing happened. The cooler hummed. A light buzzed overhead. The place smelled faintly of cleaner and stale food. I took another step inside. The door shut behind me with a solid click that sounded final in the quiet. I glanced toward the aisles. They were narrow and fully stocked, labels facing forward, no signs of rush or struggle. The open register didn't match the rest of the room. It felt like an invitation left unfinished. I stood there for almost a minute, longer than felt polite, then longer than felt normal. My sense of time stretched thin. The open drawer pulled at my attention. I felt exposed standing in front of it, like I was on camera even if I couldn't see one. That was when I noticed the security mirror. It hung above the counter, the round convex kind meant to watch blind spots. It wasn't angled toward the aisles or the door. It was tilted sharply, aimed down a short hallway to the back room. The mirror caught that space perfectly, reflecting a narrow corridor with a closed door at the end. The angle was intentional. Someone had adjusted it to watch that hallway and nothing else. I followed the mirror's line without moving my feet. The hallway itself was darker than the store, lights dimmer, shadows thicker along the floor. The door at the end was closed, but not tight. A thin line of darkness showed where it didn't meet the frame. I understood then that the mirror wasn't for theft prevention. It was for timing. Someone wanted to see when that door opened without being seen themselves. The open register drawer made sense in that context. It was bait, but not for money. It was to hold a person in place, to keep them standing at the counter, visible in the mirror. My skin prickled along my neck. I didn't feel watched in the usual way. I felt measured. I stepped back slowly, keeping my eyes forward, not turning toward the hallway. I reached into my pocket and pulled out cash, placing it on the counter without counting. The bills felt thin and useless in my hand. I didn't touch the register. I didn't call out. I turned and walked toward the door at the same steady pace I had used coming in. The chime rang again as I stepped outside, too loud, too cheerful. The lot looked unchanged, empty, quiet. I got into my car and locked the doors before starting the engine. The headlights came on, washing the building in white. I pulled out slow, watching the windows. As I reached the edge of the lot, I glanced back. The lights inside shut off one by one. Not all at once. Not a power cut. The back hallway went dark first, then the aisle lights nearest it. The counter area stayed lit a moment longer, then went out as well. It looked like someone moving through the building, turning switches as they followed my path backward. I drove until the road straightened and the station fell out of view. I didn't slow until another set of lights appeared ahead, a cluster that marked a small town. My breathing didn't settle until I saw other cars parked under working street lamps. The explanation didn't hit me right away. It came later, when the scene replayed without adrenaline smoothing the edges. That station was open, but not for business the way it appeared. The clerk hadn't stepped away by accident. The open drawer wasn't a mistake. The mirror angle showed planning. Someone wanted to see without being seen, to stay behind a door until the right moment. The cash wasn't the goal. The timing was. If I had lingered, if I had leaned over the counter or called out, my attention would have been fixed forward while someone approached from behind. The hallway placement forced a narrow entry and exit. The mirror removed the element of surprise for them, not for me. The lights shutting off as I left weren't meant to scare me. They were practical. The building was being secured. Whoever was inside had no reason to keep the place lit once I was gone. They waited to see if I would return or hesitate. When I didn't, they closed up room by room, conserving power and resetting the space. I never found that station again. When my GPS finally reloaded, it rerouted me onto a main road miles away from where I thought I had been. I tried to trace the route later out of curiosity. Nothing lined up. Either I missed the turn or the station wasn't meant to be easy to find again. What stayed with me was how ordinary it looked. Clean shelves, bright lights, a sound-making door. It relied on the assumption that safety comes with visibility. That night taught me the opposite. Sometimes light is used to hold you still while someone waits in the dark just out of view. I didn't stay long enough to find out what would have happened next, and that decision felt right every time I thought back on it. This happened in October 2018, around 11:30 at night, near the Louisiana-Texas border. I remember the time because my phone finally picked up a weak signal long enough to update, then dropped back to nothing. I had been hauling a small trailer with tools and spare parts from a job that ran late. The drive was supposed to be simple, straight highways, familiar stops. Somewhere outside a stretch of towns that all blurred together, my temperature gauge climbed past normal and kept going. At first I told myself it was a sensor acting up. Then I smelled it. Hot metal, sweet and sharp, leaking through the vents. When steam started curling out from under the hood, I pulled over without thinking, hazards flashing against trees and black water. I shut the engine off and sat there for a second, listening to the ticking as it cooled. I knew better than to open the radiator hot, but I also knew I couldn't stay there long. That stretch of road had no shoulder to speak of, just a narrow strip of broken pavement and swamp pressing in on both sides. I drove slow the rest of the way, watching the gauge like it might explode. The gas station came up without warning, a low building under a metal canopy that hummed with tired lights. The glow barely reached the edge of the lot. Past that was darkness and swamp, thick and wet, full of layered sounds. Insects buzzed and chirred in waves. Frogs croaked. Something larger moved occasionally with a slow splash. The air felt heavy enough to lean against. I parked near the pumps but left space between the truck and the edge of the concrete. Water pooled everywhere beyond the slab, standing and black, reflecting broken pieces of light. I shut the engine down and grabbed the jug of coolant from behind the seat. The hood was warm when I popped it, heat rolling out in a damp cloud that stuck to my face and arms. I twisted the cap carefully, waiting for the hiss to die down before pouring. The liquid glugged into the radiator, bright against the dark metal. That was when I noticed the water under the concrete pad. At first I thought it was just insects skimming the surface, but the ripples were wrong. They weren't scattered or sharp. They moved in long, smooth lines, sliding beneath the surface as if something heavy was pushing through the mud below. I stopped pouring and watched. The ripples traveled from the edge of the lot toward the center, then curved, following the line where concrete met swamp. They didn't break the surface. No splashing, no bubbles, just displacement, slow and deliberate, like a body moving through water that was too shallow to swim in. My skin tightened. I shifted my weight and the sound of gravel under my boot felt too loud. The ripples paused. The insects kept up their noise, but underneath it I sensed a change. a subtle attention turning my way. I glanced toward the building. The clerk stood behind the glass, half hidden by reflections. He was waving both arms, sharp motions that didn't match the slow pace of the night. His mouth moved wide and fast, forming words I couldn't hear through the closed door and the buzz of the canopy lights. He shook his head over and over, eyes wide, then pointed down toward the ground near my truck. I looked back at the water. The ripples had resumed closer now. They shifted direction again, angling toward the rear tires. I set the coolant jug down and closed the hood without latching it fully, metal clanging louder than I liked. I wanted to get inside the truck, but I didn't want to run. I kept my movement steady, my eyes flicking between the water and the clerk. He backed away from the window, still shaking his head, hands pressed flat to the glass like he wanted to push me away from the lot without opening the door. The refusal felt intentional, practiced. He wasn't scared of me. He was scared of what was outside. I climbed into the truck and turned the key. The engine caught rough, then settled into a strained idle. I watched the mirrors. The water beyond the concrete rippled again, closer to the tires than before. The movement stopped just short of the dry ground, as if whatever was under there knew exactly where the edge was. I put the truck in gear and eased forward. The headlights swept across the lot, over weeds and standing water, over the building's stained brick. As I pulled away from the pump, the beam caught the ground near where I had been parked. There were impressions in the mud, not footprints. Hand-shaped marks pressed deep, fingers splayed wide, palms sunk into the wet earth. They clustered near my rear tires, some overlapping, some smeared as if weight had shifted. The marks looked fresh, water still seeping into the edges. I drove out onto the road without stopping, tires throwing mud against the wheel wells. In the mirror, the station shrank back into its pocket of light, surrounded by sound and dark water. I didn't slow until I was miles away, the temperature gauge holding steady enough to breathe again. The explanation came together later, piece by piece, once my hands stopped shaking and my thoughts lined up. That area near the border had a history I hadn't thought about while driving through. Swamps like that hide things well. People use them to avoid being seen. Smuggling routes cut through wet ground because vehicles can't follow, because sound carries poorly, because it's easy to disappear into water and reeds. The ripples weren't animals. Animals don't move with that kind of coordination, that kind of intent. They don't stop when watched, then resume when attention drifts. The handprints sealed it. Someone had been under that concrete edge, using the slab for cover, moving through shallow water on hands and knees to stay low. Waiting, watching. The clerk's refusal to come outside made sense in that light. He had likely seen it before. People using the station as a marker, a place to regroup or signal. The frantic waving wasn't panic. It was warning. He knew that opening the door or stepping out would put him in the middle of something he had learned to avoid. I realized how close my truck had been to stalling for good. If it had died there, if I had needed help beyond coolant, I would have been stuck on that slab with the swamp on three sides and nowhere to go. The people under the water weren't interested in me as a person. They were interested in opportunity. A broken-down vehicle at the edge of nowhere is an opportunity. By the time I reached a larger town and pulled into a bright, crowded station, the night felt different. Louder, safer. I checked under the truck with a flashlight. Mud clung to the frame, streaked in places where something had brushed against it. I washed my hands twice in the bathroom sink, watching brown water swirl down the drain. I never reported the station. I didn't have anything solid enough to explain without sounding unhinged. I did change how I drive long routes after that. I carry extra coolant now. I watch where I stop. I pay attention to water, to silence, to places where the light ends abruptly. What stayed with me most was how quiet it all was. No chase, no confrontation, just movement under the surface and hands in the mud, close enough to touch my tires without making a sound. The danger wasn't loud or sudden. It was patient, already there, waiting for something to fail. This was early March 2021, just before dawn, somewhere in rural Mississippi. I had been driving close to 6 hours straight, pushing through the night to make up time, living off gas station food that never sat right. My stomach had been tightening for the last 30 miles, sharp cramps rolling through me every time I shifted in the seat. When I saw the station ahead, I felt relief before I even slowed down. The place looked recently renovated. New pumps with bright screens, clean glass that reflected the pale blue of the approaching morning, fresh paint on the building still too white for the dirt around it. The lot was wide and empty, no tire tracks cutting through the gravel, no cars pulled along the edges. It felt unfinished, like something set up for a photo rather than real use. I parked close to the entrance and shut off the engine. The quiet pressed in right away. No highway noise, no distant traffic, just insects and the faint hum of electricity from the pumps. The air smelled damp, heavy with the kind of cold that sticks to your clothes. I walked inside fast, focused on getting to the bathroom before my body forced the issue. The interior matched the outside. Bright floors, new shelves, everything arranged neatly, almost carefully. The clerk stood behind the counter, upright and still, his face blank but alert. His eyes followed me as I passed, tracking without turning his head. I noticed it but didn't stop. My stomach clenched hard enough to blur my vision. The bathroom was down a short hallway beside the cooler. The door was solid but plain, painted the same white as the walls. When I went to lock it, my hand met nothing. The lock was gone. In its place was a bent piece of metal, jagged and scratched, like something had been torn out rather than removed properly. It caught the light at the wrong angle, sharp enough to slice skin if brushed the wrong way. I hesitated for a second, then told myself it didn't matter. The station was empty. The clerk was alone. I shut the door and leaned my weight against it without thinking, using my foot to brace the bottom. The bathroom smelled clean, too clean, like disinfectant layered over old plumbing. The light flickered once, then steadied. I barely had time to breathe before the pain took over. My focus narrowed to the floor tiles and the sound of my own pulse in my ears. When it eased enough for me to notice anything else, I realized how quiet the room was. No music from the store, no cooler hum, just the faint buzz of the light overhead. That was when I heard the footsteps. They were slow and deliberate, each step placed with care. Not rushed, not dragging. They came down the hallway and stopped directly outside the door. The sound cut off cleanly, like a switch flipped. Whoever it was stood close enough that I could see their shadow at the bottom of the door, blocking the light from the hall. They didn't move. They didn't shift their weight. They didn't clear their throat or sigh or do anything that would mark them as nervous or impatient. There was no sound of breathing through the thin gap beneath the door, just presence. I stayed still, my muscles locked, my foot pressing harder against the door. My stomach cramped again, sharp and sudden, and I bit down hard to keep from making noise. The silence stretched long enough to feel intentional. It didn't feel like someone waiting for the bathroom. It felt like someone waiting for me. Time lost shape. My thoughts started running in tight circles, landing on details that made no sense. The missing lock, the empty lot, the new paint paired with broken hardware. I stared at the handle, imagining it turning, imagining the door pushing inward against my leg. It didn't move. After what felt like several minutes, the shadow shifted. The footsteps moved away, slow again, measured, retreating down the hall. I waited longer than I needed to, counting my breaths until my hands stopped shaking. When I finally stood, my legs felt weak, like they might fold if I rushed. I unlocked the door out of habit, even though there was nothing to unlock, and pulled it open. The hallway was empty. No one stood there. No movement. No sound fading away. The cooler hummed softly now, like it had never stopped. The store lights buzzed overhead. Everything looked normal, too normal. My skin crawled with the wrongness of it. I walked back toward the counter, my eyes scanning the aisles, the corners, the reflective surfaces. The clerk stood where he had been before. He was smiling. The smile was too wide, stretched tight across his face, showing more teeth than it should. His eyes stayed fixed on me, bright and focused. It wasn't friendly. It wasn't nervous. It looked practiced, like something he had done many times. like he knew exactly what had just happened in that hallway. My hands felt dirty. My chest felt tight. I didn't wash my hands. I didn't look back toward the bathroom. I walked straight out the door, the bell ringing behind me, loud and wrong in the quiet lot. I got into my car and locked the doors before starting the engine. My hands shook on the steering wheel as I pulled out, tires crunching too loud on the gravel. In the mirror, the station shrank back into the gray light of morning, clean and empty again. I didn't understand it fully until later, when the fear settled into something colder and clearer. The missing lock wasn't neglect. It was removal. The hallway placement forced anyone using the bathroom to pass the counter twice, isolated and visible. The silence outside the door wasn't hesitation. It was control. Someone standing still to avoid sound, to listen, to measure vulnerability. The clerk's smile wasn't relief. It was confirmation, a signal that the routine had played out as expected. Someone tested the situation. Someone left without making trouble. No need to escalate. I realized the station wasn't renovated to welcome customers. It was renovated to manage them. Clean surfaces hide wear. Bright lights erase shadows. An empty lot before dawn discourages witnesses. The bathroom, without a lock, creates a moment of helplessness without forcing confrontation. Most people would panic, rush, make noise. I stayed quiet. I waited. That likely saved me from whatever came next. I don't know who stood outside that door or what their role was. I don't know how often that station saw travelers like me, exhausted and alone, bodies betraying them at the worst time. I do know that fear doesn't always come from what happens. Sometimes it comes from realizing how close you came to something planned. I drove until the sun was fully up, until traffic returned and the world felt occupied again. I stopped later at a crowded rest area and washed my hands until the water ran cold. Even then, the image stayed with me. The bent metal where a lock should have been. The shadow under the door. The smile that said I had passed a test I never agreed to take. I stopped because I worked nights doing HVAC repairs, and my company van was on fumes after a last-minute call that ran longer than planned. It was late, well past midnight, the kind of hour when the roads thin out and even busy towns feel half shut down. I had been replacing a failed compressor at a small medical office, sweating through my shirt under buzzing fluorescent lights, then packing tools back into the van with hands that felt numb from fatigue. I checked the fuel gauge before pulling out and felt a drop in my stomach. The needle sat below empty, resting on hope and habit. I told myself I could make it home, but the van sputtered once when I merged onto the road, and that settled it. The gas station sat a few miles ahead, one I had passed dozens of times during the day but never at night. It was technically open, but the main canopy lights were off. Only the pumps glowed, harsh white rectangles floating in the dark. Inside the building, the register area gave off a dull yellow light, like an aquarium after closing hours. The rest of the lot fell away into shadow. No other cars, no traffic noise, just the hum of the pumps and the low throb of insects in the grass beyond the pavement. I pulled in and parked beside the nearest pump. The engine ticked as it cooled, each sound sharp in the quiet. When I stepped out, the smell of gasoline mixed with warm asphalt. The air felt thick, heavy with leftover heat from the day. I fueled the van, watching the numbers climb, my eyes drifting toward the windows of the store. They reflected light back at me, mirror dark, hiding whatever was inside until I opened the door. The bell chimed when I entered, thin and strained. The store looked smaller than I remembered. Several ceiling lights were off, leaving long shadows between the aisles. The shelves held the usual mix of snacks and drinks, but many spaces were empty, labels curling at the edges. The counter stood under its own bright square of light. Behind it was the clerk. He looked exhausted in a way that went beyond a long shift. His collar was dark with sweat, spreading unevenly across the fabric. His hair clung to his forehead. His hands shook as he straightened a stack of receipts that did not need straightening. He kept glancing toward the aisles, then back at the register, his breathing shallow and fast. I felt a pinch of concern but brushed it off as stress. Night shifts wore people down. I walked to the counter and slid my card across. While the machine processed, I waited, letting my eyes adjust. That was when I noticed the second shadow. It moved behind the shelves, slow and deliberate, pacing back and forth along the far aisle. It never stepped into full view. I couldn't see a face or even a clear outline, just a shifting block of darker dark against the shelves. The movement stayed low and controlled, stopping when I looked directly at it, starting again when my focus drifted. The clerk's hands shook harder. Sweat beaded along his temples. He did not look toward the shadow, but his body angled away from it, shoulders drawn tight. The card reader beeped softly. He glanced at the screen, then at me, then back toward the aisles. His eyes were wide, glassy, reflecting the light in a way that made them look wet. I felt the urge to ask if everything was okay. The words rose up on instinct. As soon as I shifted my weight and opened my mouth, the clerk's eyes filled with tears. They pooled fast, spilling over without warning. He shook his head once, sharp and final, then slid my card back across the counter with a quick, urgent motion. His hand brushed mine for a fraction of a second, cold and damp. The message landed clear without sound. I was not supposed to be there. I took the card and backed away from the counter. My heart started to hammer, not from panic yet, but from the sudden clarity of danger. I did not turn toward the aisles again. I kept my eyes on the door, aware of the space behind me without looking at it. The bell chimed when I stepped outside, too loud, too cheerful. The lot felt darker than before. The pump lights buzzed overhead, attracting moths that battered themselves against the glass. I walked fast to the van, unlocked it, and climbed in. My hands shook as I turned the key. The engine caught on the first try, a relief that felt almost painful. I pulled away from the pump, tires crunching over gravel, and aimed for the exit. As I reached the edge of the lot, my headlights swept across the side of the building. That was when I saw him. A man stepped out from behind the wall, adjusting a pair of dark gloves. He moved with calm purpose, no rush, no hesitation. His clothes were plain, dark, meant to blend into shadow. He stood still as the light hit him, watching the van. His face stayed unreadable at that distance, but his posture said enough. He was waiting. He had been waiting. I drove past without slowing, my grip tight on the wheel. In the mirror, I saw him turn his head to follow me until the angle broke and the building blocked the view. The road ahead stretched empty and black. I pressed the accelerator harder than needed, the van responding with a low roar. I did not relax until the highway came into view, its reflective signs flashing reassurance back at me. Traffic noise returned, distant but real. I merged and kept going, my chest tight, my thoughts racing to catch up with what had just happened. The explanation formed slowly as the adrenaline faded. The station was open but dimmed on purpose. The empty shelves suggested cash shortages, maybe deliberate, maybe forced. The second shadow behind the shelves was not hiding from me by accident. It was staying out of sight to avoid being seen by cameras or by anyone who might come in unexpectedly. The man behind the building was positioned to watch the lot, to intercept anyone who lingered or tried to leave without paying attention. The clerk's state made sense in that light. He was not just tired. He was trapped in a situation he could not control. His shaking hands came from fear, not exhaustion. The tears were the breaking point of someone being forced to cooperate under threat. Sliding my card back was an act of protection, a way to get me gone before I became part of whatever was unfolding there. I realized the station was likely being robbed in slow motion, not a smash and grab, but a controlled hold. The people involved did not want noise. They did not want witnesses. They wanted the clerk compliant and invisible, the store technically open to avoid drawing attention, the lights low to discourage customers. Anyone who walked in was a risk. Anyone who stayed became a problem. I reported the location as soon as I reached a safe area with service, giving the best description I could. I do not know what came of it. I never went back to that station. I adjusted my routes, watched my fuel gauge closer, stopped earlier even when I felt tired enough to push on. What stayed with me was not the image of the man behind the building or the shadow between the shelves. It was the look in the clerk's eyes when he shook his head. That single motion carried more urgency than words ever could. He did not ask for help because help would have made things worse for him in that moment. He asked me to leave because leaving was the safest option for both of us. That night taught me how danger can sit quietly inside ordinary places, waiting for timing rather than opportunity. The station did not look abandoned or violent. It looked tired. It relied on people passing through without paying attention. I paid attention just long enough to get away, and that was enough. I stopped because I worked nights doing HVAC repairs, and my company van was on fumes after a last-minute call that ran longer than planned. It was late, well past midnight, the kind of hour when the roads thin out and even busy towns feel half shut down. I had been replacing a failed compressor at a small medical office, sweating through my shirt under buzzing fluorescent lights, then packing tools back into the van with hands that felt numb from fatigue. I checked the fuel gauge before pulling out and felt a drop in my stomach. The needle sat below empty, resting on hope and habit. I told myself I could make it home, but the van sputtered once when I merged onto the road, and that settled it. The gas station sat a few miles ahead, one I had passed dozens of times during the day but never at night. It was technically open, but the main canopy lights were off. Only the pumps glowed, harsh white rectangles floating in the dark. Inside the building, the register area gave off a dull yellow light, like an aquarium after closing hours. The rest of the lot fell away into shadow. No other cars, no traffic noise, just the hum of the pumps and the low throb of insects in the grass beyond the pavement. I pulled in and parked beside the nearest pump. The engine ticked as it cooled, each sound sharp in the quiet. When I stepped out, the smell of gasoline mixed with warm asphalt. The air felt thick, heavy with leftover heat from the day. I fueled the van, watching the numbers climb, my eyes drifting toward the windows of the store. They reflected light back at me, mirror dark, hiding whatever was inside until I opened the door. The bell chimed when I entered, thin and strained. The store looked smaller than I remembered. Several ceiling lights were off, leaving long shadows between the aisles. The shelves held the usual mix of snacks and drinks, but many spaces were empty, labels curling at the edges. The counter stood under its own bright square of light. Behind it was the clerk. He looked exhausted in a way that went beyond a long shift. His collar was dark with sweat, spreading unevenly across the fabric. His hair clung to his forehead. His hands shook as he straightened a stack of receipts that did not need straightening. He kept glancing toward the aisles, then back at the register, his breathing shallow and fast. I felt a pinch of concern but brushed it off as stress. Night shifts wore people down. I walked to the counter and slid my card across. While the machine processed, I waited, letting my eyes adjust. That was when I noticed the second shadow. It moved behind the shelves, slow and deliberate, pacing back and forth along the far aisle. It never stepped into full view. I couldn't see a face or even a clear outline, just a shifting block of darker dark against the shelves. The movement stayed low and controlled, stopping when I looked directly at it, starting again when my focus drifted. The clerk's hands shook harder. Sweat beaded along his temples. He did not look toward the shadow, but his body angled away from it, shoulders drawn tight. The card reader beeped softly. He glanced at the screen, then at me, then back toward the aisles. His eyes were wide, glassy, reflecting the light in a way that made them look wet. I felt the urge to ask if everything was okay. The words rose up on instinct. As soon as I shifted my weight and opened my mouth, the clerk's eyes filled with tears. They pooled fast, spilling over without warning. He shook his head once, sharp and final, then slid my card back across the counter with a quick, urgent motion. His hand brushed mine for a fraction of a second, cold and damp. The message landed clear without sound. I was not supposed to be there. I took the card and backed away from the counter. My heart started to hammer, not from panic yet, but from the sudden clarity of danger. I did not turn toward the aisles again. I kept my eyes on the door, aware of the space behind me without looking at it. The bell chimed when I stepped outside, Too loud, too cheerful. The lot felt darker than before. The pump lights buzzed overhead, attracting moths that battered themselves against the glass. I walked fast to the van, unlocked it, and climbed in. My hands shook as I turned the key. The engine caught on the first try, a relief that felt almost painful. I pulled away from the pump, tires crunching over gravel, and aimed for the exit. As I reached the edge of the lot, my headlights swept across the side of the building. That was when I saw him. A man stepped out from behind the wall, adjusting a pair of dark gloves. He moved with calm purpose, no rush, no hesitation. His clothes were plain, dark, meant to blend into shadow. He stood still as the light hit him, watching the van. His face stayed unreadable at that distance, but his posture said enough. He was waiting. He had been waiting. I drove past without slowing, my grip tight on the wheel. In the mirror, I saw him turn his head to follow me until the angle broke and the building blocked the view. The road ahead stretched empty and black. I pressed the accelerator harder than needed, the van responding with a low roar. I did not relax until the highway came into view, its reflective signs flashing reassurance back at me. Traffic noise returned, distant but real. I merged and kept going, my chest tight, my thoughts racing to catch up with what had just happened. The explanation formed slowly as the adrenaline faded. The station was open but dimmed on purpose. The empty shelves suggested cash shortages, maybe deliberate, maybe forced. The second shadow behind the shelves was not hiding from me by accident. It was staying out of sight to avoid being seen by cameras or by anyone who might come in unexpectedly. The man behind the building was positioned to watch the lot, to intercept anyone who lingered or tried to leave without paying attention. The clerk's state made sense in that light. He was not just tired. He was trapped in a situation he could not control. His shaking hands came from fear, not exhaustion. The tears were the breaking point of someone being forced to cooperate under threat. Sliding my card back was an act of protection, a way to get me gone before I became part of whatever was unfolding there. I realized the station was likely being robbed in slow motion, not a smash and grab, but a controlled hold. The people involved did not want noise. They did not want witnesses. They wanted the clerk compliant and invisible, the store technically open to avoid drawing attention, the lights low to discourage customers. Anyone who walked in was a risk. Anyone who stayed became a problem. I reported the location as soon as I reached a safe area with service, giving the best description I could. I do not know what came of it. I never went back to that station. I adjusted my routes, watched my fuel gauge closer, stopped earlier even when I felt tired enough to push on. What stayed with me was not the image of the man behind the building or the shadow between the shelves. It was the look in the clerk's eyes when he shook his head. That single motion carried more urgency than words ever could. He did not ask for help because help would have made things worse for him in that moment. He asked me to leave because leaving was the safest option for both of us. That night taught me how danger can sit quietly inside ordinary places, waiting for timing rather than opportunity. The station did not look abandoned or violent. It looked tired. It relied on people passing through without paying attention. I paid attention just long enough to get away, and that was enough.